And then it's State versus Carolyn Latin, State versus Debbie Latin. Mr. Cover, I assume you could come forward to
Yes, sir,
that table. And your compliance could come with you, of course. And there's another chair there, if you want a chair.
I'll stand, Your Honor. Thank you, though.
Okay. And so, just for the record, this case was here a couple of weeks ago. Mr. Cover had filed a motion for immediate return of some goats. And the state had responded to that, which was filed, I think, yesterday. I know I got it yesterday. And then, and I think this hearing was set on to discuss that issue about the return of the goats. In the meantime, earlier today, shortly before taking the bench, I had handed a number of other things. There was a reply from this motion from Mr. Cover on behalf of the Lattins to return, and then there were some other things, a subpoena ducis tecum, and then a declaration of Mr. Cover in support of that. So I guess, what are we doing here today? Are we just having a hearing on the return of the animals? Or
I now have 4 issues for pretrial, Your Honor. You took care of my first one earlier with the issue of the recording.
Okay.
I have these in order according to their rightness, depending on how you rule. I'd like to talk about first service of new material and then the petition for immediate return. Depending on your ruling, the subpoena ducis tecum may or may not be necessary.
Okay. So
First,
what do you want to handle first?
I'd like to handle service, Your Honor. I have service for the documents that you just mentioned. In addition to our 4 witnesses, one of them will be Thurston County Commissioner Gary Edwards, testifying on behalf of Mrs. Latin.
Is that?
That is the witness list that has been filed along with the papers I sent with the bench copy. I hope that got to you. I think it got to you.
It did.
This is what you received earlier today, Your Honor.
Right. And so, in terms of witness, is that witness for trial?
We're anticipating trial at this point, Your Honor. I'm unsure, but we're getting ready at this point after our conversations with the state.
Okay. And then, so the witness list that you have submitted, those are trial witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor.
And so, what would be the relevance of that testimony? Because whether or not that testimony is allowed may dictate whether or not visiting a judge is necessary.
Oh, are you talking about the testimony for Commissioner Edwards, Your Honor? Yeah. Commissioner Edwards can testify to his lifelong friendship with Mrs. Latin, to her character, and also to his vast knowledge on police procedures as his over 2 decades of Thurston County Sheriff.
Wait a minute, vast knowledge of?
Police procedure, Your Honor, and Thurston County Sheriff's Office policy.
Well, he's listed on as a witness list. I'm going to reserve. I'm not going to make a ruling on whether or not he'll be allowed to testify at trial or not. I'll allow you to brief that for future hearing to determine one way or the other as to whether or not he may be allowed the testimony. We'll need a showing of relevance, of course. I mean, the issue in this case, as I understand it, is the level of care provided to these goats, and if that level of care produced the injuries and suffering that's being alleged. That's going to be the relevant testimony and evidence in this case.
Yes.
Again, I'm not sure how Mr. Edwards' vast knowledge of police procedure affects that.
Well, it would affect that because it would affect the determination according to RCW 16.52 that a deputy would make. There's 2 different standards in the animal cruelty statute, and he may be able to shed some light on the common procedure and the history of that procedure here in Thurston County. But as you say, we can revisit that issue later.
Okay. Okay, we will. Is the next issue you wish to bring up?
Yes, the petition for immediate return, Your Honor.
Okay. And then on those particular, on that particular issue, again, I've reviewed, again, that reply was just handed to me. I know you just filed that earlier today, which I understand, but I want to take a look at that in more detail.
Is that in here as well?
Yes.
Give me just a second. Yeah, it's right here. Give me just a second, Mr. Clover.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, Mr. Cover, I've reviewed, I didn't review the attachments. I've reviewed your reply. Go ahead.
Thank you,
So
Your
this
Honor.
is your motion. The way we'll go is I'll hear from you, I'll allow the state to respond, and then I'll give you the final word.
Thank you,
Go
Your
ahead.
Honor. As you just read, my client submitted the standards set forth in RCW 16.52.085 sub 6. If the goats are returned to the Latin farm, there is no danger there will be future neglect or abuse, and there is no need to restore those animals to health. Now, as far as the future neglect or abuse, I'd like to point out the fact that Dr. Clark, the state's veterinarian, contradicted his own testimony according to the record, according to the filings that exist in the case here. Dr. Clark has given many characterizations in the record saying that the animals are underfed and emaciated. However, if we look at Deputy Nastansky's representation of Dr. Clark's body condition scoring, we will see that only 5 out of 18 animals had a body condition score of 2, which is thin, which is not emaciated, which is not animal cruelty. However, 11, the majority of the goats that were seized, had body condition scores of 4 or 5, which means they were heavier than normal. And I'd also put out that after the many examinations that have occurred from both the state's veterinarian and Dr. Humphrey, no veterinarian has made any finding that these animals have been overfed. Further, I'd like to point out that in the audio statement made by Dr. Clark on June 15th, before he even set foot on the Lattins farm, he made recommendations that these people should be using a few medications, one of which is called Sept, a worm. Now, later that day, the veterinarian, Dr. Clark, went to the Latin farm's residence and somehow happened to miss the fact that these people have Sept to use to deworm their animals. Deputy Nastansky was good enough to actually take a picture of the Sept, which is included in the attachments that you have there. So the care that Dr. Clark thinks that he needed to recommend has already been taking place. Further, the animals do not need to be restored to health. Now, yesterday when I got Mr. Young's reply, I learned something extremely disturbing. The goats who were seized from Mrs. Latin landed at the mystery goat storage, wherever Hooked Animal Rescue puts them. And on June 5th, according to Dr. Clark's report, according to Exhibit A of my colleague's filing, those animals were clean of hoof rot on July 5th, but then on July 24th, and then August 29th, I believe it is, August 22nd, the goats had come down with hoof rot again. Now this is the height of summer, Your Honor. The height of summer when the ground is at its most dry. Now, even so, Dr. Humphrey, who examined the goats over at the Latin farm on just the day before Dr. Clark's report, indicate that the 13 remaining goats at the Latin farm do not have any hoof rot. So the reality here is that the Lattins have succeeded in curing their hoof rot, where the state's mystery goat storage has failed, Your Honor. Now, this is why, Your Honor, we're asking for a subpoena ducis tecum, because I found out shortly after that, after I contacted Mr. Young about about inspecting the goats at the location where the goats are actually housed, I received an email from Mr. Ajit Singh Khalsa saying that he didn't want to comply with your order. He wanted to go through a formal discovery process according to the rules of criminal procedure. We find it concerning and odd that the state's evidence custodian is lawyering up in the manner of a criminal defendant. Now that's their right, but we're disturbed by that.
Relevance for the motion hearings.
It is relevant because it militates towards the fact
Hang on
that
just
this
a
is
second, Mr. You know, when objections are made, I get to talk, okay? And so I'm going to overrule the objection, I'll allow him to continue, and but just remind you that the subpoena isn't necessarily in front of me here right now.
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Yes. Now the fact that the state, that Hooked Animal Rescue has lawyered up, indicates something to us. They don't want us to see that the practices that are going on at Hooked Animal Rescue are fundamentally the same as at the Latin farm. Now, if that's not the case, then that means, if we're going to take the charges against my client seriously, that the state is neglecting their goats. Now, we don't actually believe that that's occurring. What we believe is that the people at Hooked Animal Rescue are experiencing the very same thing that Mrs. Latin experienced. The fact that hoof rot is the athlete's foot of hoofed animals. It's a common malady, and it's not something that would cause them to have their animals deprived from them. So if we're not going to charge Hooked Animal Rescue with animal cruelty in the second degree, then it stands to reason that there has been no neglect, and the animals do not need to be restored to health. And for that reason, I would ask the goats to be returned to my clients forthwith today, and that all bills that were accrued by Hooked Animal Rescue will be paid by Hooked Animal Rescue, as well as my fees. And I'd like to point out that when I met with my client, with Mr. Young on the 31st, they're already talking about a $2,200 fee bill. That's outrageous. That is gouging. That is unacceptable for anyone who would represent themselves, be custodian of evidence here in Thurston County.
Again,
with that, I rest, Your Honor.
Well, I'll overrule the objection. Is it your position, or the Latins' position then, that these animals, these goats, were in good shape and should never have been taken from the Ciderville?
Yes, Your Honor. These animals were in such shape that there was no neglect. There was nothing that would militate towards a finding of animal cruelty. There was constant veterinarian care. There was no way that these people knowingly, recklessly, or with criminal negligence caused substantial harm to happen to these animals due to any failure or lack of care. That's our position, Your Honor.
I have another question, and that is, you submitted a letter from, it looks like Jason Humphrey, dated June 28th. Talks about who'd been on the farm and reviewed some of the goats, indicated a treatment regimen for this individual was discussed. Debbie Latin and I discussed establish a valid veterinary client-patient relationship, which tells me one didn't exist at the time, as well as developing animal handling, herd vaccination, disease prevention, and treatment protocols. This process is in progress, but not yet completed. What's the status of that?
The status of that formal relationship has been established. That was the first compliance report. And I'd like to add that there's evidence in the record that my clients have dealt with several veterinarians, that there are other large animal vets that have went out of business, most notably at the Deschutes Veterinary Clinic. And so yes, now there is a proper veterinary relationship with Dr. Humphrey, who is now, I believe, their 5th veterinarian.
Thank you. Anything further?
Nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
Mr. Young?
Thank you, Your Honor. And the state's not suggesting that the animals will not be able to return at some point, but it is very premature at the moment. When these animals were taken, Dr. Clark did indicate all goats on the examination the next day showed signs of foot scalding. There was lameness noted in 15 of the 18 goats that were taken, which means they were limping. All goats had signs of the foot scalding. Notice it was related to being housed in wet, muddy conditions where animals are continually in contact with mud and manure. The acceptable management of this condition includes providing dry housing areas and treating the affected animals. The lack of proper management and treatment of the condition is what he's indicating is causing animals to be chronically lame and in pain. And he also noted that the group, these animals were on the thin side. Young animals, the adult bucks were in somewhat better body condition, but the other animals were very thin, or thin to very thin. Dr. Clark is present. I'm prepared to have him testify if the court is interested. He would testify that these animals were in poor condition. And since they have been seized, these animals have been responding to treatment. What Mr. Cover is referring to about a return of foot rot, 2 animals showed signs of foot rot, which have since again responded to treatment. The animals still require significant treatment in order to be restored to health. And so I don't think they have not proven that these animals return to a situation where they'd be properly cared for. As the Honor just noted, they had not been receiving proper veterinary care. They're going back to a farm that's just now starting to understand what it takes to have a herd. These 18 animals would be reintegrated with a lot more other animals that be competing for resources. It would require still additional treatment, which brings to the next prong of the statute. They have to be able to prove that these animals do not require additional restoration. They haven't proven it. In fact, Dr. Clark can understand and tell you that these animals still require additional care. In addition, which is not even really discussed, the foot scalding, talking about the lameness, is indicated that these animals have been dealing with chronic lameness condition, which he notes is painful. It also indicated issues with worm. Either the animals were not being properly fed, or not being properly dewormed. There's indicates there are simple things that can be done to remedy this. The fecal egg counts should be performed on several of these animals before deworming. There are several things that the Lattins could do but did not do to properly ensure weight. And if Your Honor is interested, I have 2 individuals who would be here to testify to what the ghosts look like when they were seized and what they look like now. The other thing I would point out is that the animals that were left on site, the remains that appear to be doing well, those animals were left there because they were not yet in the poor condition of the animals that were seized. So what they are doing right now is they are maintaining healthy goats, whereas the state of these hard science is trying to revive unhealthy goats who have very much since shown progress in the treatment. The other thing I would point out is even if the court did find that these 18 goats would be returned to a farm that can properly care for them, but these goats did not require further treatment. This is still evidence in the case, Your Honor. These goats are still being restored. Where they are from when they're diseased to where they get to is important, and these animals still require care. That is critical evidence. court has any further questions.
I would just comment with regard to, you've indicated Dr. Clark is here. I've reviewed his report. If there's any information that's not in the report, then maybe we'd hear from him, but if he's just gonna say everything that's already in the report, I don't see any need to hear from him.
Your Honor, we would also object.
Okay.
We were not aware that Dr. Clark would be here. We would love the chance to cross-examine him. However, we have not had the opportunity to produce Dr. Humphrey to rebut any testimony that he would make on veterinary medicine.
So I'll hear from you, Mr. Culver, in reply. I was gonna ask you about that. I neglected to ask you about this in your initial presentation. But you know, I was struck by, in Dr. Clark's report, you know, as I understand it, and all I know is what's been presented to me in the filings, and Deputy Nastansky's report has been included in your filing, Mr. Culver. This all came about because of allegations of lameness and hoof rot, and how it occurs, what happens to animals, or what happens to those animals like goats when that does happen. In the course of when these goats, the 18 goats left the Lattins farm, it looked like that there was, and again I'm going to quote from his report, this group of animals demonstrated a heavy burden of GI parasites via fecal egg counts, and it indicates that, and I think the word infestation was used at some point. I mean, how do you respond to that in terms of, you know, I hear from you that the care is great, and these goats should go back to the Lattins. How do you address that?
First, Dr. Clark doesn't have a scientific basis upon which to make that judgment. In the audio statement that was taken from Dr. Clark by Deputy Nastansky on June 15th, Dr. Clark is heard audibly complaining about the levels that existed in the lab report. He actually said, these are the wrong ratings for goats. So I am unsure what he has done to actually draw that opinion. When you combine that with the contradictions in his testimony versus the numbers in his body condition scoring, and I would ask you to compare those numbers to the peer-reviewed scholarly source that I provided to the court. A body condition score of 2 is thin, it's not emaciated. And also in that work, you will see that every herd has animals that are both thin and fat. So somehow to say that this body condition score adds up to animal cruelty is ludicrous, Your Honor, and it doesn't have any basis in science. Further, I would like to add that all of the pictures of the goat's hooves were taken at hooved animal rescue. The mud and manure that is on those hooves was from hooved animal rescue, wherever they took them, the mystery place. That is why we are asking to see the condition of the farm. Further, my colleague here says that we haven't proven anything. Let me be clear. The standard of proof that we're looking at here is a preponderance of the evidence. More likely than not, it's more likely than not that the goats will be healthy at the Latin farm than the mystery goat storage, because they've cured the hoof rot and they have not. Further, I'd like to say that Dr. Clark doesn't have any grounds to talk about what happened before or after. What with all the inconsistencies in his own story, he certainly doesn't have any personal knowledge on what these people have been doing to care for the goats. However, Deputy Nastansky was good enough to provide us with a mountain of veterinary records from all the different veterinarians that they had seen over the years who they had engaged for treating all sorts of maladies, to include hoof rot and gastrointestinal parasites. Further, I don't have an expert before you now, but I have it on information and belief that these deworming agents that are prescribed by veterinarians have, the parasites that they treat develop an immunity. And it is hard for veterinarians, indeed for farmers as well, to get effective GI parasite treatments sometimes, because the big corporations that make these things don't make their money on the large animals. So the farmers have to make do with what they've got. Further, my colleague points out the fact that it would somehow prejudice his case if the goats were brought back. Deputy Nastanski has been over there with 2 search warrants so far. If they don't have the evidence that they need to prove that my clients committed animal cruelty on the 18 goats on June 14th, they're not going to get it. And I submit to you that they will not get it. It doesn't exist. No jury is going to convict them of this. Okay. I just want to reiterate again, Your Honor. The hoof rot disappeared over here. The hoof rot came back over here during the hottest, driest months of the year. And with that, I rest regarding my petition, and I'll take any questions that the bench has.
Sure. So the issue in front of me at the moment is whether or not these animals are going to be returned to the Lattins. I just want to make a, so again, I've heard argument of counsel. I reviewed the submissions from both parties, and I want to highlight a few things that I heard in and that's contained in these submissions. First of all, with regard to RCW, in a motion or petition for the animal's return before a trial, which is what we're having here right now, the burden's on the owner to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that the animal not suffer future neglect or abuse and is not in need of being restored to health. Just put that out there and hold that aside for a second. And I want to highlight a couple things that were both submitted in both veterinarians that were attached to the attorney's motions and response. And I was struck by some of Dr. and I'm going to read and highlight some of the comments from Dr. Clark. Indicates in the first paragraph, an assessment of the group of animals, neither the ones who were removed from the Lattins farm, showed all animals demonstrating some degree of foot scald. Almost all were showing some degrees of lameness, in parentheses, limping, because of their foot scald. Many animals were affected in multiple feet. Also, the animals as a group were thin in their body conditions. It goes on to describe the concept of foot scald. I won't go into that in great detail, how it happens and how you treat it. He also indicates that the animals that were taken from the farm, again, demonstrated a heavy burden. I know I've already read this. A heavy burden of GI parasites via fecal egg counts. The high fecal egg count indicate that they were not being properly dewormed. A reasonable deworming protocol for goats includes fecal egg counts and deworming those who have a high worm count. And then in the third to the last paragraph, the overall initial impression of this group was one where they were not receiving appropriate medical care for their feet, they were not being fed an appropriate diet, and they were not part of an appropriate and adequate deworming protocol. Regardless of the issue, they should have been under the care of a veterinarian who would have been able to provide professional guidance and the correct drugs to treat these animals. Adequate medical treatment would have ensured these animals have not been in such poor condition, nor would they have been suffering from their sore feet. Last paragraph indicates these animals will require close monitoring and treatment, both as needed and preventative, to ensure the foot scald is controlled. They will also require appropriate housing that is dry and sanitary. They will need to be fed a diet that meets their nutritional need, and a deworming protocol will also be required to ensure that they do not become reinfested, that's his word, with GI worms. These are all very basic things related to goat husbandry that were not being accomplished when in care of the Lattins, and that's the conclusion, such as it is from Dr. Clark. Also in there, Dr. Clark indicates that the goats did disagree with Mr. Cover's assertion that the hoof rot came back while under the care of, I missed whatever acronym that is.
Part C, Your Honor.
The agency that is currently looking after the goats. In fact, as I read the report from Dr. Clark, the opposite has occurred, and these animals responded well while away from the Lattins. Also, I read this bit as well, treatment regimen for this individual, and this is from, I'm quoting from Dr. Humphrey right now, the treatment regimen for this individual was discussed, Debbie Lattin and I discussed, established, developed veterinary client-patient relationship, as well as development animal handling, herd vaccination, disease prevention, and treatment protocols. said the process is in progress but not yet completed. Mr. Cover indicated in response to my question that it had been completed, but I'm going to find that that's going to be necessary and documented and submitted to the court before approval is given to go, let me finish please, I'll give you a chance to respond, and before the animals return to the Lattins. You know, if I'm going to make an error on this case, and one side or another is going to think I'm going to be making one, I'm going to err on the side of maintaining the health and welfare of these animals. I mean, you look through the animals, as I've read through the reports, the description from Deputy Nispansky, the description contained in Dr. Clark's report, and combined, frankly, with the comments that the vet retained by the Lattins, before these animals are going to be returned, allowed to be returned to the Lattins. I'm not going to grant that today. What I'm going to want to see is a written plan, a protocol that incorporates all the things identified by Dr. Clark, including appropriate deworming protocol, appropriate protocol of medical procedure for hoof rot and so forth. And perhaps most importantly, I'm going to want to see a mechanism to make sure that that plan is complied with. Whether that's not agreeance that animal control can come on and review upon request. And so that's what I'm going to do for today. And again, that's kind of more advising what I'm doing with regard to allowing the animals to go home today pursuant to a motion. I'm not going to allow that until, again, I see those things that I identified.
Your Honor, I just want to state for the record that I believe you're reading from the June 24th filing, the June 21st filing by Dr. Clark. I would direct the court's attention.
This is June 28th.
Great, thank you. I would refer the court to the August 23rd, 2017 report of Dr. Humphrey. And just invite you to take a read and see if that doesn't change your opinion, Your Honor. Your Honor, that would be...
Was that in the reply?
Yes, it is, Your Honor.
That's why I missed it.
Yeah, defendant's reply.
Is this August 23rd?
Yes, Your Honor, I have it noted as Exhibit A of the first declaration of Justin Cover. I filed it along with it.
And this say it's August 23rd, is that what you?
Yes, Your Honor,
Okay,
that's
hang
the
on a
most...
second, give me a second. It's a short report. And again, this is, on August 21st, you went to the Latin Cider Mill Farm to examine the 13 goats that remain there, and all were doing well, which is great. And the reason they weren't taken in the first place is because they were doing well and healthy goats. I'm more concerned, and my concern and the basis for my ruling is on the goats that were, and I'll use this word because this is just my impression from the things that were submitted from both parties. My concern is the suffering that was apparently borne by the goats that were removed in terms of the limping and the lameness and the hoof rot and apparently the apparent infestation of worms. And so it's great that the goats that remain on the Lattins farm are doing well. Fantastic. I couldn't be more happy about that. But I want to assure that the goats that were affected and the goats that were the county felt to remove, those are the goats I'm concerned about. And if those go back, I want to see a protocol in place that ensures their health and safety, again, with a mechanism for appropriate compliance.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you.
And so that resolves that issue. If there's other things you wish to address here today, we can. I just kind of glanced at that subpoena. I didn't go do it in great detail. But I'm not sure how much, you know, another thing we need to talk about, you mentioned the term trial a couple of times, and we can talk about that as well. Right now this is set for, it's not set for trial, but we need to be mindful of where we're at with regard to speedy trial. It appears to me in review of the docket, they were arraigned on July 24th, which is 90 days from July 24th is the, I didn't do the math, but somewhere around that same date in October, to be a proper, the clerk can tell me. October 22nd is the 90th date for speedy trial. So we can set this for trial if you want, if you think other hearings are necessary, but again, I want to be mindful of that trial date, absent some sort of waiver. If you want to set it for an additional hearing, you can do that. I am going to allow the state a chance to respond to that subpoena due just taken. I think the issue of whether or not Commissioner Edwards would be allowed to testify is, I think, something that needs to be resolved pre-trial. And I think that needs to be briefed, but, so I'll kind of put it back in your lap, Mr. Cover, as to where you want to go from here.
My first thought, Your Honor, is that we would like a 3-5 and 3-6 hearing or the equivalent. We'd like to talk about suppressing the warrant. There's plenty of evidence here that is ripe for suppression. We're good with a combined hearing for the sake of judicial efficiency if the court and my colleague have no objection in that regard.
I certainly don't. And then counsel can go across the hall to Becky and speak with her about setting a date for future motions, and I'm fine with that. Anything else need to be dealt with today?
Yes, Your Honor, there's the matter of the goat inspection. Now, the reason for the subpoena juice is taken is because the custodian of the state's evidence has lawyered up. They don't want to show us the conditions on which the goats are being kept. You've expressed concern for the animal's safety. Well, in Dr. Clark's report, it says that the animals had recovered and there was no lameness, and then a month later, the hoof rot is back. And so we want to establish that the goats are in a safe place, because they won't even tell the address of this place. Okay?
Well,
We won't.
Okay, for a second. Well, go ahead. I'll let you finish, then I'll let the state respond.
There's also the fact that the state came back with a second search warrant, took numerous photos throughout the property, even in places where the animals are not necessarily kept, random pastures and such, and we would only like, to have the same opportunity to look at where the county keeps their animals, so that we can get a sense of what acceptable farm practices are, or whether they're actually occurring.
Mr. Young?
Your Honor, his request is completely irrelevant to the issues at hand. The other concern is there is a genuine concern for safety and evidence tampering by allowing individuals to go onto the properties that are being used to house the goats. Would be completely unacceptable.
Your Honor? I'm sorry, Mr. Young. Your Honor, I'm Jay St. Tulsa, attorney for Heartsea, and I would appreciate an opportunity to hear on this as well.
You can take a seat, and then I'll let them finish.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. We have arranged to have the goats inspected, and we arranged at a neutral location. No issue with actually having goats inspected, but having it done on the properties is not going to provide any value to the issue. In fact, it's only going to seek to endanger those who are involved. It's also, it's just not, it's not necessary.
So and I did see that in there, Mr. Cover. My reaction to that is this. As I think about this case, and this is somewhat of an unusual case for what we typically see in district court, but and again, I get back to kind of where I started on all this. The issue in this case, as I see it, is whether or not the Lattins provided appropriate care for the goats or not. That's it. And how they're being cared for now, I guess I struggle to see the relevance of what went on with regard to, on the Lattins farm with regard to the safety of the animals. So what I would be inclined to do at this point, if you wanted, and I saw in there was an offer to inspect the animals and animal control, certainly that could and probably should happen. With regard to, and I guess I would just suggest there might be other reasons, there might be some good reasons why one wants to keep seized animals at an unknown location. There might be safety reasons. Some people are, there might be safety reasons for the people providing care for those animals. And so, and again, I'm just suggesting there might be other reasons for that.
Your Honor,
So let me finish, please. And so what I would do with this particular case is essentially, again, deny the motion to go on the premises at that place now, leave you the opportunity to, again, brief that. And if you can demonstrate relevance as to how and why that's important to the defense of the Lattins' performance on care of these animals, then that can be presented at that time. And at that time, attorney for that agency, whose acronym I forgot, can be heard.
Very good. Thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor, I'd just like to say for the record, we can't establish animal cruelty in a vacuum. Whether these people knowingly, recklessly, or with criminal negligence committed substantial harm to the animals is going to necessitate a standard. And this is why what is going on in Hook Animal Rescue of Thurston County is relevant, because it would help establish a standard.
And again, I'll allow you an opportunity to brief that, and again, for a future hearing.
All right. One more issue, if the attorney's not going to be there. Now, these men were chosen for their honor and their reputation in the community, and I would just ask for the court's permission that these two gentlemen, very clean, upstanding, well-known gentlemen in the county, be allowed to accompany Mrs. Lattin, to the inspection in my absence, if I am absent.
Mr. Young?
No, Your Honor, I am objecting to the presence of unnecessary individuals. They're disinterested parties that does not serve anything productive towards what is trying to be accomplished in this case by having the president. If she does need assistance, there are other avenues. They can hire a nurse, they can do anything other than that.
Your Honor, that is
Just unfinished, please.
Thank you, Your Honor.
When do you know whether or not she'll be available? And I understand if your travel plans are being affected by the frankly horrific events on the East Coast, that's terribly unfortunate. I'm sorry about that. But when do you know, do you think?
I will know on Monday the 11th, Your Honor. I would just like to add that, one of the things that looms large here is the cost. Every single thing that Hooked Animal Rescue does costs. No doubt they love the idea of piling all the ghosts into a trailer and charging them for taking them to the animal rescue. We'd ask the court to please defer any cost for this inspection accruing to my clients.
If I may, Your Honor.
Sure.
That can be reserved for a restitution hearing.
Who's going to do the inspection? Is that going to be the
Dr. Humphrey, Your Honor.
okay. And then, and Mr. Young, you're going to be there? Anyone else?
I intend to be there, Your Honor.
Okay. Anyone else from the state?
I may ask Dr. Clark if available.
Okay.
Also, Deputy Nastansky.
And so,
Your Honor, we believe there would be a Messiah problem if Deputy Nastansky were present.
what do you mean by that?
Your Honor, they have attorneys, and we're unsure if Deputy Nastansky would be there as merely a witness, or she would be there to gather evidence in her capacity as a deputy sheriff.
Well, I think that, we can adjust the visit to when you are available. I mean, if you were there with them, then she could certainly be there. And so, and I understand that, but I mean, if, so frankly, I see Mr. O'Sullivan's here. I'm leaning towards just allowing him to be there with your assurance and his that he won't intervene or won't comment, and just allow the vets to do their job. But if there is any sort of intervention or meddling, I would just give the state permission to stop things on the spot and reconvene at a different time.
No objection there, Your Honor.
So, but my question then gets back to Deputy Nastansky. I mean, I'd be inclined to let her be there too. And again, with the same thing, she can't obviously interview your clients or anything like that. There's no one would allow that. But the fact that she's there on scene watching all this, I don't see any harm there.
It sounds like we're on our way to an order that we can live with in that regard, Your Honor.
So, and I guess why do you need two? Is Mr. O'Sullivan can handle it?
Mr. O'Sullivan can handle it, I think, Your Honor.
And so then we'll allow him to be present just for the purpose of providing care and escorting, for lack of a better term, the Lattins to and from the review. And again, with the admonition, no interference, and I know we won't, but I'm going to just put on the record, no interference, nothing, or anything of that sort. And there you go. And maybe this might be a moot point if, and again, the horrific events on the East Coast don't interfere with your plans. If do interfere with your plans, you might be able to do it yourself.
Yes, Your Honor. And I will inform Mr. Young one way or the other on Monday, no later than 4 p.m.
Anything further?
A couple of quick items, Your Honor, for housekeeping, I believe. One, counsel brought up at last hearing the issue of the warrant. My records indicate the warrant had been sent to him with an initial discovery. He and I did chat about it. I showed him that warrant. He still requires an additional copy of it. I could provide it, but I believe that had been provided our initial discovery.
Your Honor, it was provided. It was in an interesting place. However, the affidavit is there. So yes.
So you've got it now?
Yes, Your Honor.
Great.
Your Honor, it does appear that this is heading towards trial, which is not necessarily where we wanted to go with this, but I don't know if negotiations are being fruitful. I'm going to ask the court to set for trial at this point. Which I probably could have mentioned earlier, and for the court's awareness, this has been our intention all along, was to, during negotiations, we just filed one charge against these individuals. We do intend to add 17 counts to each to each of the defendants. So it'll be a total of 18 counts coming in our kind of complaint, which I've let defense counsel know last week as well.
Do you have a position on setting a trial date as well? And again, I would send you over to, we can do that, but I would send you both over to the calendar clerk to get that.
That was my understanding that we would do that, Your Honor.
All right.
Sounds great.
Okay. Anything further, Mr. Young?
Very last item, Your Honor. And just an observation, both defendants are using the same counsel. At some point, they've signed a waiver to allow they both are under the same counsel. I don't know if they've ever been advised as to whether or not that's a good idea. I just want to put that on the record.
And you can discuss that with your client and make an appropriate record at the appropriate time, Mr. Colbert.
Yes, Your Honor. For the record, I have talked to my clients about RPC 1.7. There is no conflict at this time, and if there is any conflict appears, they have been counseled on proper actions to take.
Okay.
Nothing.
All right, Mr. Colbert, anything further?
Nothing more from the defendants, Your Honor.
We'll be done for today. You can go for, actually, I have, how many witnesses for the state? Normally, trials in district court are a day. I suspect this one may go longer. And so we want to make sure that we're going to allow the appropriate number of days for it. And so, Mr. Young, how many witnesses do you anticipate?
I project 8 to 12.
And then you submitted a witness list. Do you suspect any you might be adding to that? Or is that going to be, do you know? I'm not
I
going
may
to
be pending
Right
further
now, there's
discovery
4.
briefing. I may pending further discovery briefing, Your Honor.
So you may, you might want to let the clerk know that this might go 2, maybe 3 days. And of course, we'll accommodate that as long as it starts within speedy trial, which is fine.
Great, Your Honor.
That's it for today.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you very much, Your Honor.